Imagine you're standing on a hilltop. You're completely alone. No laws, no government, absolutely no one to tell you what to do.
Right. Which sounds like the ultimate expression of freedom to most people.
Yeah, exactly. But what if you aren't actually looking at freedom at all? What if you're just staring at this, like, philosophical mirage?
In a mirage that's kind of quietly dismantling modern society at that.
Right. It's a jarring thought. Welcome to another deep dive, by the way. I'm your host, and today our mission is to really untangle these two massively loaded words.
Liberty and rights.
Exactly. We build our whole civilization around them, but if you try to pin down what they actually mean, they just sort of slip right through your fingers.
Oh, totally. Which is why we're looking at a very specific framework today to help ground this.
Right, we're pulling from an article called Liberty and Rights. It's an excerpt from a book called 2025 U.S. Launches Correction by Young Kang.
And before we even start,
Uh-huh.
we have to establish the blueprint here. The author has incredibly strict rules for the vocabulary we're going to use.
Yeah, the rules of engagement are totally rigid for the adjectives.
Right. So the words negative and positive are strictly reserved for liberty. Like, you can't have negative or positive rights in this framework.
Okay, so liberty is negative and positive.
Exactly. And on the flip side, the terms passive and active are only used for rights. So there's no such thing as active liberty.
Passive and active rights, negative and positive liberty. Got it. If we blur those, the whole argument just collapses.
He really does.
Now, real quick, a disclaimer for you, the listener. The material we're diving into today has some pretty polarizing critiques, right?
Yeah, it takes a really hard swing at modern liberalism, secular philosophy, and the welfare state. And it does this from a strong theological perspective.
Right, and I want to be super clear. Our job here isn't to take a side. We aren't endorsing this worldview or, like, arguing against it.
No, we're just pulling apart the machinery so you can see how the gears turn and, evaluate it for yourself.
Exactly. So let's get into that first gear. Because to understand rights, we actually have to establish what it means to be free.
And this framework takes a totally counterintuitive approach. It argues that to understand liberty, you have to look at its exact opposite.
Slavery.
Right. Not just as a historical thing, but as the literal default setting of humanity.
The ground state. I love the physics analogy the text uses for this.
Oh, yeah. Break that down.
So it compares human liberty to an electron. Slavery, whether it's external or internal, is the ground state. It's where things just naturally settle.
Like gravity. Enslavement is just the universe's default pull.
Yes, if you stop paddling, you float downstream. Liberty is the excited state. Escaping slavery takes a massive burst of momentum, but staying free takes constant energy.
Right. And the author uses the biblical story of Exodus to map this out.
Oh, right, with the Israelites in Egypt.
Exactly. The Pharaoh enslaves them physically.
Mm-hmm.
That's external slavery, totalitarianism, coercion, literal chains.
But then they escape. They cross the Red Sea, they're completely physically free, and what do?
They immediately melt down their gold and start worshiping a calf.
Right, it's wild. They trade external slavery for internal slavery.
Because human nature is inherently flawed in this view. The second we're free from a dictator, we just look for something else to surrender our autonomy to.
An idol, an addiction, a destructive impulse.
Right, the bondage of sin. The core idea is that falling into some kind of slavery is just normal.
And if we get tired of using all that energy to stay in the excited state of liberty, we kind of develop Stockholm Syndrome.
Exactly. We start identifying with our chains because it's just easier than the hard work of staying free.
Which brings us to the author's linguistic argument. This is why the framework insists liberty has to be a negative concept.
Right. And I know calling liberty negative sounds like an insult to a lot of people.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying liberty is bad.
But it's actually about how language works. We use positive words for things that physically exist. A car, a tree, a house.
Right.
But they're words that only describe the absence of something. Think about the word peace.
Oh, right. Peace isn't a thing you can hold. It's just what happens when a war stops.
Exactly. Or health. Health is just the absence of disease. Silence is the absence of noise.
And liberty functions the exact same way. It's just the absence of enslavement or coercion. Nobody is holding you down.
Yes. And the author draws on philosopher Isaiah Berlin here, who separated negative liberty from positive liberty.
Right. Negative liberty is just the absence of obstacles. But positive liberty, that's where the author says things get incredibly dangerous.
Because positive liberty tries to define what freedom is supposed to look like. It presets a way of life.
Like saying, you're only truly free if you're highly educated, or if you follow these specific moral values.
Exactly. And the moment you define freedom as a specific destination, you basically create a new master.
Wait, really? But isn't having a goal for a good life the whole point?
Well, the argument is that if society decides true freedom requires a certain ideal, then suddenly society is totally justified in forcing you to conform to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they'll say it's for your own good. So you're being coerced into a specific behavior, but they're just wearing a nicer mask and calling it freedom.
It's like that hilltop analogy from the intro. If you look out at the horizon and see all these great human ideals, the view is great, but you aren't looking at liberty anymore.
Right, you're looking at goals. Liberty itself is just the negative state of not having chains around your ankles right where you were standing.
Okay, so if true liberty is just the negative state of not being chained up, how does that actually translate into the things we are legally allowed to do?
And that's where we move from liberty to rights. And remember, the rule rights are either passive or active.
Passive and active.
And to explain this, the author pulls us all the way back to a medieval Christian principle. Duties first, rights follow.
Which is completely backwards to how we think today. I mean, we usually start by yelling about what we're owed.
Oh, absolutely. But this older worldview starts by establishing what we owe to other people.
And the blueprint for this is the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah, exactly. The commandments are mostly a list of duties phrased as prohibitions. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet.
Okay, but how does my duty not to steal actually create a right?
Through what the author calls mathematical coupling. A true right, a passive right, only exists because it's perfectly paired with someone else's duty.
Let me see if I have this. So, my right to own property only exists because you and literally everyone else have a strict duty not to steal my stuff.
Perfectly said. If everyone does their duty and leaves you alone, your passive right to property is protected. The scale balances.
Passive rights just require other people to do nothing. Just stay out of my way.
Exactly.
But, okay, I want to push back on this a bit because the text goes after the American Declaration of Independence.
It does. It goes right for the pursuit of happiness.
Right. And from a modern standpoint, wanting people to be happy seems pretty universally good. Why attack that?
Well, under this framework, the pursuit of happiness is an active right, and active rights break that mathematical coupling because there's no paired duty. Think about it. If you have a right to be happy, who has the legal obligation to make sure you're actually happy?
Nobody. I mean, I can't sue someone because I'm having a bad day.
Right. There's a great quote from economist Friedrich Hayek in the text about this.
Oh, the house burning down one?
Yeah. Hayek says we don't have a right for our house not to burn down, simply because no one has a general duty to prevent it from burning down.
That makes sense. You can't claim a legal right to a situation unless a specific person has a specific duty to make that situation happen.
Exactly. Uncoupled rights are basically absurd in this framework.
So let's apply this to today. We constantly argue about the right to universal health care or a living wage.
Right. Active rights.
How does the author view those?
The author views them as structural impossibilities that damage society, because you're demanding a state of affairs like being healthy without a natural duty attached.
So if I have a right to health care, suddenly a doctor or a taxpayer is just conscripted into a duty to provide it.
Exactly. Their passive right to be left alone is violated, so your active right can be fulfilled.
Wow. And a text says this fundamentally alters the moral fabric of society, right?
It really does. Historically, helping the sick was a virtue. It was an act of moral goodness.
But if healthcare is an innate right, then helping someone isn't a virtue anymore. It's just fulfilling an entitlement.
Exactly. You aren't being generous by feeding someone. You're just paying off a debt you apparently owed them just because they exist.
It totally hollows out the morality of the act. We go from a community built on voluntary virtue to a system of coerced transactional demands.
Right. So the big question is, if the old system was perfectly balanced with passive rights and duties, how did we end up fled with all these active rights?
Right. How did we get here? And the text lays out this massive historical paradigm shift to explain it.
The great philosophical inversion.
Yes. Starting with the era of natural law, with guys like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas.
In that era, the universe had a divine order. Your main goal in life was to align with divine goodness. Duties to God and community came first.
Then John Locke shows up with his state of nature idea.
Right, this romanticized prehistoric era where people naturally had natural rights The focus started drifting away from duties and toward the individual.
But the real plot twist, the actual architect of the modern world, according to this text, is Machiavelli.
Machiavelli, it's such a wild pivot.
Seriously, we usually think of him as the ends justify the means, political tactics guy. How does he break the history of human rights?
By completely flipping the hierarchy of human priorities. Before him, a civilization's goal was to create good people focused on saving their souls.
So morality and politics were basically the same thing.
Right. But Machiavelli severed them. He decided that having a stable state and being a good citizen was way more important than spiritual perfection.
So he just separated government mechanics from the pursuit of virtue.
Totally. He argued that religious standards of absolute goodness were messy and caused wars, so they needed to be shoved into the private sphere.
Let me make sure I'm tracking this. Before Machiavelli, a ruler says, we have to ban this practice to save our citizens' souls.
Right.
But after Machiavelli, a ruler says, we only ban this practice if it's causing riots in the streets.
That is exactly the shift. And that separation built the foundation for modern rights-based liberalism, with thinkers like John Stuart Mill and John Rawls.
Okay, so classical liberalism basically looked at centuries of religious wars and said, look, we're never going to agree on the absolute truth.
Exactly.
So instead of killing each other over the highest good, let's just create a system that protects everyone's individual bubble.
Right. Liberalism decided that rights take precedence over the good.
So to avoid violence, we just have to treat all claims of the good equally.
Yeah, liberalism essentially says the highest morality is refusing to judge which moral claim is actually superior.
And that leads to this incredible paradox the author points out. By saying every belief and culture is equally valid, modern liberalism basically mandates that no belief can claim to be objectively true.
They're stripped of all their public weight. You can believe what you want in your own house,
Yeah.
but it can't influence shared public policy.
Right. In our obsession with respecting everything, we actually made everything functionally meaningless.
Yes.
Because if every value is equally true, then nothing is actually true. And the text argues this just leads society straight into relativism and nihilism.
It's straight line.
It's wild to think a 16th century Italian diplomat is the reason my social media feed is just an endless war over identity and truth.
I mean, when you strip away absolute goodness, society still needs a foundation. Nature abhors a vacuum.
So what did we replace it with? Boundless, unrestricted liberty?
Exactly. The text traces this evolution through Immanuel Kant, who tried to build society purely on individual liberty and rationality.
But the ball just kept rolling down the hill until the 20th century French philosophers picked it up, specifically Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze.
And they radicalized Kant's ideas completely.
Right. Foucault essentially said that any universal law or moral boundary is just a disguise for oppression.
Because, following liberalism's logic, if there's no objective truth, then any rule is just an arbitrary preference that is strong them, the strong force onto the weak.
So to Foucault, the only way to be truly free is to constantly reject and destroy any affirmative law.
Right. All structures inevitably oppress someone, so dismantle them all.
It's a philosophy where the only rule is to break rules.
Yeah.
It's like taking a sledgehammer to the walls of your own house because you feel oppressed by being enclosed.
That's a great analogy.
But once you knock all the walls down, you aren't liberated, you're just shivering in the rubble when it starts raining.
And Deleuze took that destructive logic even further.
Right.
He said that to be truly free, humans have to become perpetual nomads.
Nomads, like physically moving around.
No, existentially. To achieve total liberty, you have to relentlessly reject anything that grounds you.
Wow.
You have to untether yourself from your ethnicity, your history, your family, your marriage, even the biological reality of your gender.
You literally have to negate your own identity so you aren't tied down by anything.
Exactly.
So if we trace this whole journey, the author's ultimate conclusion is that this obsession with absolute liberty doesn't elevate us at all, it uproots us.
It casts us into a void. We're connected to nothing and responsible to no one.
The framework basically says this kind of nihilistic liberty destroys the foundation required for human community to even exist.
Yeah, it's not a political disagreement to the author. It's an existential crisis. It threatens the possibility of being truly human.
Man, we have covered so much ground today. This is heavy stuff.
It really is.
We started with the physics of freedom slavery as the gravitational ground state, and liberty taking constant energy.
Then we looked at how passive rights are mathematically coupled with duties, and how active rights break that scale.
Right, demanding entitlements without assigning obligations. And then that massive philosophical flip from divine goodness to existential nomads.
Wandering in the ruins of our own institutions.
But there's a super practical takeaway here for you, the listener. Next time you're reading the news and someone proposes a new human right, put it through the test.
The passive versus active test.
Exactly. Ask yourself, is this purely negative? Does it just require me to leave this person alone?
Or is it active? Does it demand a material state of affairs? And most importantly, who is mathematically required to sacrifice their liberty to pay for it?
It completely shifts how you view political debates. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought that builds on all of this.
Let's hear it.
So the author fiercely argues that true liberty is the negative state of not being enslaved, right? Fighting that internal ground state.
Right, battling the default pull of human nature.
But look at the modern world. We carry smartphones that track our location, our purchases, our private conversations.
Telecoms.
We interact with digital algorithms designed by behavioral psychologists specifically to hijack our dopamine and keep our attention captive.
We literally live in an environment optimized for behavioral control.
Exactly. So here's the question. As we relentlessly pursue this modern, boundless freedom, tearing down traditions and declaring our autonomy, are we actually liberated?
Or are we just building invisible forms of slavery?
Right. Are we constructing a brand new ground state out of code, algorithmic addiction, and social pressure instead of chains and idols?
All while loudly congratulating ourselves on how incredibly free we are.
Exactly. Something to think about.